So welcome to the next part of our program on stage 3 today. We will have some fellows here from the Global Voices Advocacy. So what is Global Voices Advocacy? I will tell you in a short minute. Is a project of Global Voices Online. And they seek to build a global anti-censorship network of bloggers and online activists throughout the developing world that is dedicated to protecting freedom of expression and free access to information online. So we have 2 speakers. One is Ellery Biddle. She is a tech and society enthusiast living in San Francisco and an expert on the politics and policies of internet use in Cuba. She works as an editor of Global Voices Advocacy, the digital rights reporting and advocacy project of the Global Voice Citizens Media Network. So, welcome. Thanks that you're here. And we have also Hisham Almiraat. Hope it's right. Yeah. He's also Global Voices Advocacy Director and a longtime member of the Global Voices community. He's passionate about citizen media and freedom of speech, and also medical doctor and blogger. So if somebody will get sick during, maybe you can help. Prior to working with Global Voices, he co-founded Talk Morocco and Mam Fakinch, 2 award-winning citizen media platforms. I'm happy that you're here, and we are all hoping for a very interesting session. Thank you. Welcome. Oh yeah, maybe for the procedure, you just said you will talk about 40 minutes and then 20 minutes Q&A, so to be prepared.
Can we actually, can we use 2 mics? Yes. Hi, so I'm Ellery, and this is Hisham.
My name is Hisham. Hi, everyone.
And I guess we got a much more thorough introduction than we expected, but we're here from Global Voices, citizen media network with writers around the world. So today...
Yeah, today we decided we wanted to start the conversation by talking about a couple of, most common myths floating around about the so-called open and free internet.
So, Hisham, wouldn't you say it is more or less true that the internet is a free, open, public space?
Well, I'm afraid, Ellery, that this is not completely true because almost 90% of the internet is actually owned by private companies. Most of those companies are based in the US and Western Europe. That's a beautiful picture that you took, Ellery, and you're probably going to share it on Facebook. And once you share it on Facebook, technically, your data, your picture, is now subjected to rules and regulations of a privately owned company. And under those rules, that privately owned company decides how you share your data, who is able to access that data, and ultimately, it controls the way you express yourself online.
All right. Now, isn't it true that most internet users are in the United States and Western Europe?
I'm afraid that assumption is not true either, because as we know today, the next billion internet users will come from the global south. Recent data shows that of all regions, the places in the world where which are the most growing in terms of new IP addresses are located in Africa, Latin America, and mostly Asia as well, Southeast Asia in particular. So it's a false assumption to consider that it's only the West or North America.
I see. So this makes me think of another idea that I have that, wouldn't you say there are only really internet enemies and internet friends? You know, you hear in the news about China or Iran, Saudi Arabia. Those kinds of countries have really extreme policies so there's a lot of censorship, a lot of surveillance. But aren't other countries, everything's pretty much fine, right?
Well, sure. I mean, mainstream media usually likes to paint that silly image of black and white, of enemies and friends. And to some extent, it can be true in certain extreme cases like Iran or China, but most of the time, that separation between black and white is not accurate. It's not even helpful to grasp, for us internet users, to grasp the reality and the complexity of the internet today. Let's be clear about something. All governments everywhere in the world are worried about how the internet is shaping society today and how it is impacting on all structures of power, whether it's political or economic power. So, be assured that they will do all they can to, mitigate that impact on those structures of power. Even here in the EU, legislators seem to be very keen in issuing a number of copyright laws to try to control the way you express yourself freely on the internet or the way you innovate or share data online. Think about what ACTA, PIPA, or SOPA would have had as an impact on your way of expressing yourself on the internet. Oh, and now it's my turn. As a rights activist, I have a number of preconceptions and ideas about the internet I want to share with you, Ellery. Wouldn't you think that today, with new technology and circumvention tools and everything, maybe governments are afraid of new technology?
Well, I know that that's a sort of a popular idea, but I would actually say that the internet makes it easier than ever for governments to censor and surveil citizens. Any government, if it wants to, can have a lot of control over the networks in its country so that it can block content where it wants to or monitor people where it likes. And private platforms offer governments a great opportunity as well. There, they can monitor citizens, think about activists, journalists, the kinds of people we work with. And they can also use those platforms to promote their own policy agendas.
Okay, fair enough. But would you say that the biggest threats for freedom of expression online today come primarily from governments and corporations?
Well, I would say that those are really, really big threats, but they're not the only sources of problems for this community. We have to think more about other actors. And one example that I would give is Bangladesh. Right now, there are massive protests happening concerning the trial of some human rights trials from, human rights violations that were committed in 1971.
Sure.
And what has happened is there are a lot of bloggers who sort of have a prominent role in these demonstrations, and they have been persecuted actually by the government, but also by religious fundamentalist groups that are actually threatening their physical safety. So it's important to keep in mind that it isn't only these sort of official actors, but also informal, just other people in society can present a threat too.
Sure. So we talked about those myths, and we had this conversation just to highlight the contrast between what is preconceived about the internet today and what is the reality as we perceive it, our perception of the reality of the internet today on the internet. So today we want to talk about real people, and we want to talk about the problems they face on the complex internet of today. And why we want to talk about this, it's because freedom of expression is at the core of our organization, which is Global Voices Advocacy. And we know as well that freedom of expression should be at the core of any open internet, if there is anything of that kind out there. And most people would never feel free or safe or comfortable enough to express themselves freely if they feel that there is an eye hanging over their heads and that they are surveilled constantly. So we are going to talk about concrete examples that we have experienced through our work on Global Voices.
Thanks. So Global Voices, I sense that a lot of you are familiar with the network, but for those who aren't, we are a large network of writers from 120 countries around the world, and we all contribute to one site. And as Hisham said, our project is really devoted to focusing on issues of free expression and privacy online and thinking about how these problems affect real people, sort of at a personal level or at a community level. So I'm going to start out by talking about a particular example that I know well, which is that of surveillance in Cuba. Cuba is a country that does not get a ton of attention in the digital rights space, and I think part of the reason for that is that there isn't a whole lot known about it. I choose this example because it's been a focus for me, but also because the surveillance paradigm there provides a really good counterexample to a lot of conversations about surveillance in the digital rights community. And I think that's true because this is a place where physical surveillance and sort of real life surveillance is so common and pervasive that the issue of digital surveillance is almost a secondary concern for a lot of people using the internet there. So I wanted to start with this picture, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the way that surveillance works in Cuba at a grassroots level. On any given city block in Havana and in every small town around the country, there is usually one house. Let's imagine it's like this pink house right here. There's usually one house on the block where a family lives, and that family represents the Committee for the Defense of the Revolution. And the committee is charged with helping people understand social policies, maybe sort of raising political solidarity when necessary. But whoever is sort of the household leader there also is in charge of paying attention to the block, watching people, listening to what's going on, listening to rumors, gossip. And this person keeps a log of what she learns, and then occasionally a state security person will come by and collect that log. So this is happening, imagine this, there's somebody on every block who's doing this. So what you end up with is this kind of, it's not a feeling of this big state, this big government looking down on everybody and watching them, but it's sort of like everybody is watching each other. And oftentimes this isn't necessarily just a matter of, I'm going to report on you because I want to support the government, but rather, I'm going to report on you because I'm doing this other black market thing, and I don't want, I want this security officer to look the other way, so I'm going to tell on you instead. So there's this strange economy of favors that has developed within this system, and it happens at this community block level. It also happens with employers. 80% of the working population in Cuba is employed by the government. So that leads to a situation where everybody is sort of watching each other, and your boss kind of takes notes on you, and if something happens that she feels like she needs to report, that could result in trouble for you later on. It might not, but the feeling that something could happen is very pervasive, very strong. So I wanted to talk, so that's sort of a basic lay of the land, and I wanted to talk about what this means for bloggers and what we call netizens in the country. Cuba has a small community of very vociferous bloggers, and some of them have made a very powerful statement about anonymity, or an anti-anonymity statement where they say, we don't think it's worth it, because we know, you're being watched on the street, you're being watched by your neighbor, and furthermore, if I use a pseudonym online, then it makes it seem like I think there's something wrong with what I'm saying. So some bloggers, like this is Claudia Carello, who's really, really fantastic. She has gone so far as to actually put her national ID card, a scan of her ID, on the homepage of her blog. So you see it right here. It's got her ID number, her name, her date of birth, her thumbprint, the whole thing. A number of them have done this. And I think, it's sort of incredibly bold statement about the reality there, which, as actually Yoani Sanchez, who is another very, very famous blogger from Cuba who was here on Monday, you know, she says the best way to conceal information is to not have any information to conceal. And Ioanni actually, this is her blog, which was actually blocked in Germany until yesterday for the last few days. I'm not sure. It's back now, I'm glad to say. But Ioanni actually took it a step even further, and she took these pictures of the guys who follow her. These two dudes stand outside of her apartment all day, and she sort of played this sort of trick on them where she actually took pictures of them and posted them on her blog. So she's surveilling her surveillors. So I think there are these sort of powerful statements that different bloggers in the country have made about, you know, just how sort of extreme the situation is. But the other thing that I would urge everybody to keep in mind on this topic is that there are a lot of people who aren't willing to take these kinds of risks because they have families to protect, they have families to support. It's very easy to lose your job in Cuba if you are really critical of the government. And I think something that we face a lot at Global Voices is an issue of how do activists have to go all the way? Do you have to cross this threshold? Or can you still sort of be a really strong advocate for rights while still protecting like your own, you know, your own family and your own sort of personal interests, things that are also really important to you in your life?
Sure.
Over to you.
So let me now, if I may, give you another example from my own personal experience to show you how the offline world and the old technique of surveillance and fear are, you know, gradually creeping into the online world and making freedom of expression more of a dangerous activity to have. Let me tell you about my own personal story. This picture was taken back in February 2011. These are the first, if you want, nucleus of Moroccan protesters who took to the street to kind of emulate what was happening in neighboring Tunisia, where the Arab Revolution started. And Morocco, as you know, is Northwest Africa. It's the northwestern tip of Africa. And there was so much, enthusiasm and hope for the future, and people felt liberated by that wave of pro-democracy protests that was sweeping across the region. And actually it started on the internet, on Facebook, because at the time, the feeling was that I could start a movement on the internet without fear of retribution. I can be completely anonymous, I can protect my identity, and I can start something on the real world. And that's what happened. That enthusiasm somehow led to something real and, as you know, to toppling many of those terrible regimes in the region. So one of the slogans in Morocco was a nom de guerre, a word that was used by many protesters was Memfakinch. Memfakinch means in Moroccan Arabic, we won't give up. We will never give up. And that slogan was used across the streets, across the country, in different cities, different villages. And while this was happening, the mainstream media in Morocco, the national media in Morocco, which is mainly owned by the state in Morocco, was not reporting about what was happening on the ground. It was like nothing was happening in the country. And the mainstream media, Reuters and big news agencies, were not reporting about what was going on in Morocco, mainly because it wasn't dramatic enough. So I guess it wasn't sexy enough to be reported on the mainstream media. So with a couple of friends, we decided to use that slogan and create a website which we called Memfakinch. We will not give up. And in a matter of months, 6 months, we had a tremendous traffic, almost 1 million unique internet users in the first 4 or 6 months. And we were reporting on protests. What you see on the bottom is a map of protests. We were doing that weekly, documenting pro-democracy protests in Morocco. But as the website grew in popularity, suddenly we started to receive attacks from different kinds of attacks. It started by a DDoS attack when suddenly, overnight, the website was taken offline. We couldn't access. No one could access the website. And then, on the summer of 2012, last year, we received a series of emails which we discovered later were infected by a very sophisticated piece of spyware. And we asked for help from our friends from around the world, notably from EFF and Citizen Lab and others, who volunteered to help us identify that kind of threat and help us also clean our machine and protect our identities. Because, mind you, we were almost 30 to 40 volunteers behind the website at the time, most of us highly educated, some of us lawyers, international lawyers, journalists, medical doctors in some cases. And so there were reputations in line, and people, I mean, protected their anonymity. That was their guarantee. That's why they were forthcoming and volunteered to work for the website. And our friends from overseas could identify the kind of virus that we were infected by. It's called Da Vinci. It's manufactured by an Italian company based in Milan, and it was sold to a series of powerful and rich clients. We can speculate that these clients can be governments, and it was sent all over the place to many online activists in Morocco. Why am I telling you this story? I'm not saying that Memphis was unique in its case. Actually, we were lucky because no one got arrested, no one was killed, no one was threatened. And we know that our friends in other parts of the world were not as lucky as we were, because some people in Bahrain, for example, received a similar attack by another kind of spyware manufactured in the UK by a company called Gamma, and the virus itself was called Finfisher. And some of them got arrested, some of them were tortured. But I'm telling you this story to give you the personal account of someone who was behind a volunteer project with a lot of people who were very forthcoming, but suddenly they just left because there was so much at stake. And we started in 2011 with 30 volunteers behind the website. Now it's only 3 to 4 active volunteers. And it mostly comes from the unintended consequences of these cyber attacks. And it is a psychological and a very powerful emotional component that is rarely talked about and rarely reported on mainstream media, how activists need, or the infrastructure of the internet is changing so much, with governments getting into the business, buying those very powerful and very expensive piece of software, and basically destroying and disrupting what was once a very dynamic and very free online space where people could very safely participate and create content without putting their reputation or their lives online, in the line, sorry.
Thanks, Hisham. So here are just the sort of 3 things that we feel like we kind of learn from these and a lot of other experiences of people in our network and different bloggers that we've written about or learned about in our work. And this is that, you know, in different places, there are profoundly different ideas about security and anonymity and privacy. And this is based on really unique experiences and unique kinds of governments. Different countries need different technologies that respond to all of these different factors. You know, I'm using the word different a lot, but and then just that there is an immense psychological component to this work, and it is different from person to person. And we would like very much to move away from the idea of activists as being sort of all the same, and from the idea that you're only existing online. That this is happening, you know, as part of a person's real life and often affects them sort of in a real, even sometimes physical way. So,
yeah, we would like to move on to another example, actually. It's the last example, but it's very somehow emblematic of what's going on in the new internet.
And in a lot of different countries. So the example, as I mentioned earlier, is Bangladesh. This year, a major figure in the Islamist party there Abdul Qadir Molla was put before a war crimes tribunal, and he was found guilty of hundreds of counts of human rights violations in Bangladesh's liberation war from Pakistan in 1971. So he was found guilty of all of these different counts of murder, rape, torture, etc., and he was sentenced to life in prison. But this is a country where impunity is so endemic, and people essentially expect it, that much of the public said, we are sure that this person is going to be released from jail within a few years. So this massive public movement has developed there since February, in which people are demanding the death penalty for this man. And bloggers have played a major role in mobilizing these protests that have seen now, I think, hundreds of thousands of people. So Hisham's going to talk just a little bit about what we've seen specifically, and what has happened to these bloggers.
So the new thing that is happening is it's no longer governments or corporations who are threatening the freedom of expression of politically motivated bloggers.
Well, they're still threatening it.
They are still. It's not only them, but now you have very powerful and unusually violent actors who are entering into the scene. In the case of Bangladesh, you have a very violent Islamist group who has indeed, fomented the murder of a blogger in central Dhaka in public. He was killed by a mob because of his writings online. They threatened a number of bloggers and their families, and also they went so far as to issue a blacklist of bloggers who were accused of, blasphemous writings. And indeed, 3 of them were arrested already. A 4th was arrested recently. And we see this pattern, across many countries and across many regions of the world, not only in the MENA, Middle East, or South Asia, but also in other parts of the world like Mexico, where bloggers have to face, drug cartels and very violent individuals who threaten their lives because of what they write online.
So I guess actually I wanted to add one important sort of other thing that has happened in Bangladesh just recently. The country actually doesn't have a blasphemy law, but some Islamist groups and leaders within the government are pushing for the government to pass a blasphemy law. And this, given that it is a country that actually does honor people's right to free expression, we find this troubling and disappointing. So like we said earlier, we've brought these cases today to illustrate some things that we've observed about the kind of personal level experiences that bloggers or netizens are having today with all of these sort of this diverse range of threats that they face. And we also bring them because they sort of illustrate a lot of things about the internet that upset us. I think what we would like is an internet that is actually different from the way that the real world works. And the early internet actually did kind of have some characteristics like that. But as we move forward, it starts to look more and more like the world, the physical world around us that we already know. There are political, economic, cultural power structures that have been reproduced, that have existed for a long time. They've been reproduced online, and this has happened because of choices that governments and companies have made.
That's right. Actually, the goal behind this presentation is basically to tell you about the challenges we face as netizen reporters, as people who are connected to real people in their reportings. We face editorial challenges, but we also face challenges in terms of how to advocate for those cases, those new cases that are emerging and that are rarely or seldom reported on the mainstream media. So we're here to talk about the web as we want it. And we want a world in which everyone is online. And we also want an internet in which the infrastructure itself is designed in a way to protect you and everyone to be able to create content without fear of retribution, to be able to share freely, communicate, collaborate, without a third party, a government, a corporation, or any other group coming into the picture and preventing you from using that medium that was initially designed to be yours, basically. So this is what our community, Global Voices Advocacy, the guys you saw earlier, this is what we are doing. This is what we are struggling each day to do. This is just part of the community because it's over 1,000 people.
And then we just wanted to sort of remind you of this goofy myth-busting exercise that we did at the beginning of the talk, and to say that we think it's important to bust these myths and to kind of continue to be critical of ourselves and of our own community and how we think about this stuff, because this is all moving really fast. It's hard to understand, but it's really critical for us to understand what we actually have and the challenges that we're actually facing, because only then can we start to figure out how to solve these problems.
Absolutely. Well, 65 years ago, the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, says the following: everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. We find this definition very close to the kind of ideal internet that we want, and it's amazing that it has been issued 65 years ago. So the question is, are we today any closer to this ideal than we were 65 years ago? Probably yes. But there is still many things to do, and our feeling through our reporting is that we may be losing the battle right now because of those new actors that are coming into the picture, and with their powerful money and structures, we may be losing that battle. So this presentation is actually an invitation for you guys to support our work as a community, as a network, as a global network, and also an invitation to join Global Voices Advocacy, which is a network of volunteers. So you're very welcome to contact us right after the presentation, or to send us emails, or to contact us on Twitter, and we'll find a way to make your voices heard. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Now, I think we have plenty of time for questions, right?
Yeah, if you have questions.
Okay.
Of course.
Questions?
Wait, I give you the mic.
Could you remind us of the URL for that website, please?
Good point.
This was our
friend.
Our friend,
Yeah.
part of the community, Georgia.
Why don't I just pull it up here?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
If you have any questions, you're very welcome to ask them.
Where's the Y? Oh, shoot. Sorry. Wow.
Yeah, sure.
There's a question. We have time for questions, so.
I would like to know, according to you, where is Morocco with automated surveillance of the internet? Do they monitor the web or do they not?
Do they want?
Monitor the web or do they not?
Yeah. Well, in the case of Morocco, let's say a couple of French companies are very active in selling powerful spying technology to the Moroccan government. We know that through independent reporters who are based in France, basically. And there was an article earlier last year about a system called Popcorn. It's a very powerful software that is similar in many points to another software by the same company called Eagle, and that was sold to Gaddafi during the revolution there. It was discovered in bunkers and in offices of the secret police after the revolution. And we are told that the same kind of software is being also used now by the Moroccan government. The capacity and the ability of such, technology goes beyond any intent of, uncovering crimes or anti-terrorist efforts. It is capable of literally surveilling the whole population by intercepting emails, SMSs, and what have you. So there is a trend, there is a pattern across the region where governments moved from a situation where they were somehow agnostic to the fact that internet could play a role in impacting on those old structure of police states, basically, into a situation where now they really believe that internet is a threat, and they are investing the right money to get the right technology to be able to watch their own population. So that's the situation in Morocco, and I'm pretty sure that it's happening across the board.
Other questions?
Hi, I'm Daniel, a reporter writing on activists around the world, mostly focusing on climate change. My question would be, can you give some sort of sketch which way you kind of see the fight to kind of take back or keep the free internet, how to do that? Which kind of alliances to build, which kind of measures to take? You spoke about, embedding freedom into the infrastructure, and I see that as a big battle to come in the next. That's already going on, and probably the biggest battle in the next, I don't know, 5 to 10 years. So my question is basically, how do you do that? What do you think? What's next?
Well, it's a tough question, and I think that there are different pieces to the challenge, but I guess I would say from our perspective that, the network actually is built to be pretty open. So technically speaking, the infrastructure is there. Some governments have actually started to really change it, but for the most part, it's not a question of infrastructure, it's a question of what kinds of tools and software and whatever kinds of technologies are sort of put on top of it to monitor people, to block sites, etc. And so who are the actors there? It's the companies that make the products and then the governments that use them. So that's why, in general, that is a big focus of the work. On one hand, to say to governments, listen, you've made some commitments internationally to protecting, upholding free expression and privacy. Those need to be carried out not just in, society, in sort of real space, but also online. That's a really tough thing to do, but at least I believe that the national policy level is really, really important to sort of continue to push for this stuff in most places. In some countries, there's very little to be gained there. Everywhere, pushing on companies and really trying to expose the things that they're doing and really trying to engage the public and caring about what happens to their information, what happens to their words. I think that can be hugely powerful, and that there have been some companies have made some small changes that actually reflect some interest in keeping their customers happy, and if keeping their customers happy requires them to be a little more careful with data, and when they decide to hand it over to a government, that's good news. This other question that we raised of other actors, I think, is just a huge challenge and very context specific, and it's very hard to know what you do there, but that's, there's a lot of work to do, so we'll, check in 10 years and see where we are.
Yeah, if I can just add very quickly to this, I think that internet users, somehow we are too individualistic for our own good. The fact that we have been so much, the fact that each one of us is in his own private space, working on his own and not caring about what's going on you know, in other places of the world, is somehow harming to our ability as internet users to face huge new challenges and huge adversaries on the internet. So there is a trend right now, that's my feeling, towards aggregating those efforts. And that's what Global Voices Advocacy is all about. It's a network of networks, basically. You have little islands of internet users, each fighting their fight in their own corner of the world, but we fill the gap between them. We translate from language to language. We tell the stories from region to region so that you in Germany can be aware of what's going on in Morocco, for example, because it's been written originally in Arabic. We picked up the story, we translated it, and put it on the website. It's really personal stories, telling the personal story and connecting the dots between those internet users that are so vulnerable, you know, individually, but so powerful if they come together. Any more questions?
Okay.
Okay, thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.